Who or what is the sacred feminine? This is a big question, and it's a question that doesn't have just one answer. This is the way that I like to answer it. First, she is a historical, or make that historical fact. And the reason that I start there is not necessarily because that is the most important thing. It's just acknowledging that this is the reality of the world we live in. We really like evidence based knowing. And in her case, the evidence is absolutely there. Now, it's important to note that when I say the sacred feminine is a historical fact, that doesn't mean that she shows up the same way all over the world in exactly the same form. For example, she might be a creator in her own right. She might be a particular goddess figure. She might be sacred Mother Earth. She might be paired with a divine masculine force, either energetically or as a consort. So there's lots of different ways that she can show up. But regardless, this knowing of divine source creator in some sort of form that we would identify as feminine, whether that's female body or with attributes that we've labeled as feminine, accurate or no, we find evidence of this all over the world. And so many of us have not been taught this. And I really think this is our birthright information. So this is why I always start there first. Second, particularly for those of us who may have grown up in the West in particular traditions and cultures that centered a male father god, the sacred feminine represents really powerful alternative set of spiritual principles and ideas that I think in some cases, depending on how touched you were by those religious traditions, can feel really welcoming and really, really healing. And that's not to say that by learning about the sacred feminine, that there's any kind of specific dogma or religious belief that you have to get behind. That's not what I'm talking about at all. Rather, it's filling in gaps, perhaps, of ways of seeing and thinking about the divine that you might not have gotten, that can feel, in some cases, radical, but also extremely welcome. And then, third, this might be the most important to me. I believe that the sacred feminine represents our own understanding of our sacred nature, the sacred nature of ourselves. When you start to dig into some of the writing about the sacred feminine, you might come across this concept of immanence related to divine creator source. And eminence means that this creative source, the divine, is present and active in all living things. And that's very different than if you were raised in a tradition like me, where it's envisioned that there was a male creator God who made everything, but then removed himself from those creations and lives up outside of this earthly realm. Sacred feminine is present and here and in all living things. Think of a hologram, perhaps, or fractals that reflect the whole. And so, if that's the case, then everything that's alive is sacred because it's imbued with her sacredness. That means me, that means you, but that also means every living thing, the squirrels, the ants, the blade of grass, the bacteria, the viruses, you name it. And so I think when we open to this kind of thinking, a couple of things can happen. First, if we grew up in a tradition where we really had no representation of the feminine or female as sacred, it can feel so welcoming and so nurturing to know ourselves as sacred. There can be a lot of healing that happens there. But also, when we recognize that everything around us is sacred, then our relationship to the world around us changes as well. And that goes beyond humanity. It goes to how we treat all living things and how we want to show up in the world in relationship with all these different beings. Now, of course, that answer could get a lot longer. And a lot of my work has been exploring different ways that we might answer this question of who the sacred feminine is. I think the most important thing is for you to figure out who the sacred feminine is to you and to come up with your own definitions. And so this work is about sharing with you what I've learned, how I've related to her, how I know her, but all of that is so that you can decide what she means to you and how you would define your relationship to her.